Hello, everyone. A very good evening and welcome to our weekly current affairs webinar. As you know, starting from this month, we shall be holding subject wise current affairs webinars every Tuesday. Previously, we used to have just weekly sessions by taking topics from all the subjects. Now we are refining the approach by taking up subject wise webinars so that it will be a more comprehensive way of preparing for the prelims examination. So today, the subject is international relations. I shall be taking 8 important topics from international relations that took place over the last 1 week. These topics are relevant not just for your prelims, but they are equally important for your mains examination as well. I shall give you some practice questions along with each topic and stay with me till the end of the session. Ask as many doubts as possible. After each topic, I'll try to take some questions as well. And before we begin, we have a big announcement. We are starting the prelims test series for 2024. The test series will begin from 24th December. We have 30 tests lined up to ensure that you are thoroughly prepared and you have enough practice before taking up next year's prelims exam. This test series will comprise of sectional tests, also full-length tests, and as well as separate tests for CSAT paper as well. So we hope all of you will prepare thoroughly, cover the syllabus for each test, and attempt the test as well without fail. Because this is the best way you can prepare for the upcoming prelims examination. Please note, the test series will be conducted both in English and Hindi, and we will also have a discussion of the question papers by the respective faculties. For further details, reach out to your mentors and you will get the updated details about the prelims test series. So with this, let's begin with today's current affairs session. We are going to discuss 8 important topics from international relations. The first topic is related to India's ties with Maldives. And after that, we have several important topics for today: the Gujarat Doctrine, the current developments in Myanmar, and few other smaller topics. Let's start with India's ties with Maldives. Let's understand why the topic was in news. This important topic was in news because Prime Minister Modi met with Maldivian President Mohammad Muizzu, who has been recently elected during the COP28 summit in Dubai. I'm sure all of you know that currently the Climate Change Convention is taking place in Dubai. This is COP28, the Conference of Parties 28. So at COP28, Prime Minister Modi is also taking part. And during this summit, he has met with the newly elected Maldivian president, Mohammad Muizzu. Now, why is this development important? This development, the meeting between the leaders of India and Maldives, acquires a lot of significance because Maldives recently went through a fresh round of elections. In these fresh elections, Mohammad Muizzu has won the elections and become the president of the country, and his policies towards India is something that bothers India and concerns India. So, in this regard, India and Maldives have exchanged their views regarding the relationship. And to take this relationship on the right path, India and Maldives have decided to set up a core group which will look into the future of the relationship between the two countries. So it's in this context that we need to study India's ties with Maldives in complete detail. The topic is important not just for prelims, but very, very important for your mains exam as well. We should understand, why is Maldives important for India? What is its significance in our foreign policy? What national interest does India have in Maldives? We should talk about some recent developments in Maldives that has bothered India. And we need to look at the context. We need to understand the overall political relationship and the strategic relationship between India and Maldives. Once you have this background, then you can easily relate this to the current development and understand the significance of this meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Mohammad Muizzu. So let's start with the location of Maldives. Maldives, as you know, is an island country which is strategically located in the Indian Ocean region. You can see here in this map that Maldives is made up of hundreds of islands that are distributed all across the Indian Ocean. The country is distributed in a north-south direction, and it's an archipelago of islands, meaning it is made up of hundreds of small atolls. These atolls are basically coral structures on which the landmass will be sitting. So unlike most countries, Maldives has a big geographical disadvantage. Usually a country will be geographically contiguous, having a large territorial extent. But that is not the case with Maldives. Maldives is a very small island nation made up of an archipelago, basically a group of islands, a group of atolls that make up this country. So when a country is largely made up of such distributed islands, it becomes a geographical disadvantage because connectivity is a problem. The country will not have much of resources. It will not have a strong economy. So overcoming these challenges becomes very difficult for small countries like Maldives. But however, these small island nations have a tremendous advantage, which is their strategic location. As you know, the Indian Ocean is crucial for global shipping. There are plenty of resources that are also present across the Indian Ocean. So such island nations which have a key location, they will play a critical role in global shipping, and the resources found in their countries, the marine resources present in their exclusive economic zone, becomes very, very precious and valuable. So Maldives is one such country which sits across important sea lanes of communication. SLOC stands for sea lanes of communication. These are shipping lanes used by global shipping. Essentially, your global trade depends heavily on such important shipping lanes, and countries like Maldives play a critical role in enabling the shipping channels. So for ensuring trade in this region, countries like Maldives are critical. Having stability in such countries is crucial to ensure that the global shipping here is not disturbed and the economic strategic interests of all the countries are protected. And also, if you observe, Maldives is very close to India. It's just few nautical miles away from the west coast of India, hardly around 300 nautical miles. And if you look at Lakshadweep Islands of India over here, Lakshadweep is hardly 30 nautical miles from Maldives. Our southernmost island in Lakshadweep almost touches the northernmost island of Maldives. They are just 30 nautical miles away. They are separated by the 8-degree channel over here. This is the 8-degree channel which separates India and Maldives. This is where our maritime boundary line exists. You can see this red line over here, which marks the maritime boundary line between India and Maldives. We've demarcated this maritime boundary line back in 1976, and since then we have established a very cordial, friendly, strategic relationship with this country. So Maldives not only enjoys a large exclusive economic zone filled with marine resources, but it sits at the vital junction of various shipping lanes, and as a result, it is of great significance for India. India has always seen the Indian Ocean as its own strategic backyard. We want India to be the most influential, dominant power all across the Indian Ocean, because we have vital interests from West Asia to Southeast Asia, from East Africa to South Asia. Across this region, we have major economic and strategic interests, and to protect them, we need good relations with countries like Maldives. Is that clear? So let's take a look at what kind of relations have transpired between India and Maldives in the past. Let's take a brief look with regard to the background of India-Maldives relations, and then we will examine the relations in the current context. Maldives was a British colony. It became independent in 1965, and since then, it has been heavily dependent on India. Why? Because as I told you, Maldives has a very limited economy. It has a geographical disadvantage. Correct? So as a result, it has always faced a crunch for resources. It has faced several challenges, ecological, environmental challenges. It has faced economic challenges. It has been badly affected by disasters as well. And as Maldives is a low-lying island country, it is at risk for getting submerged due to rising sea levels, which is a result of climate change and global warming. So as Maldives has faced so many risks, it has relied heavily on India for stabilizing its economy and the country. So right from the beginning, from 1960s, 1970s itself, India has been a close partner for Maldives. We have provided economic assistance. We have invested a lot of funds in Maldives. In fact, not just the Indian government, even Indian private companies are heavily invested in Maldives. I'm sure all of you know that one of the big sources of revenue for Maldives is tourism. The tourist industry, which has developed in the last 30, 40 years, has seen a lot of investments from India. Several hotel chains from India have heavily invested in Maldives, the tourism sector, which today is the backbone of the Maldivian economy. It relies heavily on tourist inflow to support its economy, and it also generates revenue from marine resources. So this is where India has played a key role, providing economic assistance, providing investments. And along with that, we have provided political stability to Maldives. We have also extended security, especially maritime security, to Maldives to protect the country from any kind of security threats. Because the country has indeed faced a lot of problems in the past, and every time India is the one which has stepped up to protect countries like Maldives. We built very close relations with the then Maldivian president, Maumoon Abdul Gayoom, who was a very good friend of India. Maumoon Gayoom was like a dictator. He ruled Maldives for more than 30 years. And throughout this period, he remained a very good friend of India, and we developed close strategic relations with Maldives. In fact, Maumoon Gayoom faced a security threat in the year 1988. In 1988, Maldives was attacked by a Tamil militant group known as PLOTE, which was based out of Sri Lanka. It was a conspiracy that was hatched by few opposition leaders in Maldives, along with few industrialists. They tied up with a Tamil militant organization from Sri Lanka in an attempt to overthrow the government of Gayoom. Essentially, they planned a coup attempt. It was an armed coup where the opposition leaders were forcefully trying to topple the Maldivian government with the help of Tamil militants. This was a major threat for Maldives. There was a threat for the life of President Gayoom back in 1988. So during this coup attempt, he reached out to India for assistance. And immediately, then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi authorized Operation Cactus, which was a daring Indian military operation in Maldives. Immediately after receiving the request, India mobilized all the three armed forces. The Indian Army, Indian Navy, Indian Air Force, all the three were mobilized, and Indian Special Forces, the para commandos, were airdropped into Maldives to fight against the PLOTE militants. Within 48 hours, we liberated Maldives, we defeated the coup attempt, and we restored political stability in the country. We saved the life of the president, we protected his government and the country, and brought normalcy back to Maldives. And the best part was India did not retain the troops. Once normalcy came back, India withdrew all the troops, thereby cementing the cordial relations and strategic relations between the two sides. Since then, Maumoon Gayoom became even closer to India. He became grateful to India, and our strategic ties flourished throughout 1990s and early 2000. In 2008, Maumoon Gayoom finally stepped aside, and he paved the way for democracy to be introduced in Maldives. Democratic elections were held for the first time. And through these elections, a party known as MDP, the Maldivian Democratic Party, won the election and Mohammad Nasheed became the president of the country. Mohammad Nasheed was a pro-India leader. Just like the former dictator Mamoon Gayoom, even Mohammad Nasheed was a pro-India leader. He cemented the India First policy of Maldives towards India. Maldives adopted India First policy, meaning Maldives would give top priority to its relations with India more than any other country. So with India First policy in place, we saw a continuation of the close strategic ties between the two sides. Mohammad Nasheed would become a good friend of India. Our strategic presence increased, our influence grew, our investments also started growing in the country. Now, please remember, this was at a crucial time because by 2008, China had already become a major power in the Indian Ocean. China was already expanding its influence, and the PLA Navy was stepping up its military deployment all across the Indian Ocean, which was seen as a challenge by India. So at this crucial point in time, Mohammad Nasheed was a good friend for India, and under MDP's leadership, very close ties continued between the two countries. During this whole period, whenever there was a crisis, India was there to assist Maldives. For example, in 2004, there was a massive tsunami in the Indian Ocean. I'm sure all of you know about this. The Indian Ocean tsunami had a devastating impact on many Indian Ocean countries. And even though India itself was badly affected, we rushed assistance to other countries as well. We provided disaster management assistance through HADR operations, through humanitarian assistance and disaster relief operations. Indian Navy supplied aid and relief to Maldives during the tsunami. It has faced a major economic crisis as well over the years. And India has provided economic support to uphold the Maldivian economy. So that is the kind of assistance we have provided to Maldives because we have major national interests here. We want to stabilize the nation, ensure that the region is stable and peaceful, and we need to deal with all the strategic security threats while protecting our economic interests. If India has to remain the most dominant power in the Indian Ocean, it's very important to achieve these objectives through our foreign policy. That is why such a close relationship had been developed with Maldives. But unfortunately, starting from 2012, we witnessed a decline in our relationship. There was a turmoil in our relations for the next 6 years. And you need to understand what happened. This is crucial to understand the current developments. In 2012, the then pro-India leader, Mohammad Nasheed, was thrown out by some of the opposition leaders with the help of police forces and defense forces of Maldives. There were few elements who were opposed to the MDP and Mohammad Nasheed. They exploited a constitutional crisis that had emerged in the country and they threw out the elected leader. Imagine a democratically elected leader who was removed from power and a new government was formed overnight. So with this, India lost a close friend in Maldives. And even before India could react and realize what was happening, a new leader was put in place known as Abdullah Yameen Gayoom. Abdullah Yameen Gayoom became the president in 2013 and he would remain the president for 5 more years in Maldives. And as soon as he came to power through this undemocratic route, he immediately started displaying pro-China tendencies, which meant he would undermine the India First policy of Maldives. So under Yameen Gayoom, we saw a sudden shift in the approach of Maldives towards India. Such a close friend, a trusted partner for India was lost because of the rise in pro-China leaders and pro-China elements in Maldives. Several key projects that involved Indian companies were cancelled, and those projects were given away to Chinese companies. For example, the Malé Airport project. Malé is the capital of Maldives, where an international airport was being developed by GMR Infrastructure from India. This key project was cancelled by Yameen Gayoom, and the GMR airport project was handed over to a Chinese company. So we saw the sudden decline in India-Maldives relations and the parallel rise in anti-India sentiments. Anti-India forces were encouraged, and India believed that there was a hand of China and Pakistan in promoting these anti-India sentiments. We saw the rise of few radical parties as well, like the Adalat Party. The Adalat Party has always advocated radical extremist views, and we saw the sudden rise in jihadist activity with links to Pakistan. India uncovered several plots by Pakistan's ISI to breed and sponsor terrorism against India, against southern India especially, through Maldives. ISIS ideology gained a lot of popularity. Several Maldivians subscribed to the Islamic State. They even traveled to Iraq and Syria to fight for Islamic State. So the rise in radicalism and extremism, the base for terrorism which got created, became a major concern for India. Parallelly, the rising influence of China, the continued political instability and weakening of democracy and human rights became a major challenge for India, and we saw a steady decline in our influence. China took over key strategic projects, and even before India could realize, we were pushed out of Maldives. This was the disastrous outcome that we witnessed during this period under Yamin Gayoom. In fact, Yamin Gayoom would even join the Belt and Road Initiative of China. An entire island called Fedu Finolu, the strategic Fedu Finolu island, was given to China on lease. Even today, China controls this island of Maldives. It is building port facilities and runways which could potentially be used by the Chinese military to project its military influence in the Indian Ocean. So these developments obviously bothered India. They were of direct concern for India. So Yamin Gayoom, who was now clearly acting against Indian interests, started favoring China and even signed a free trade agreement with China. Until then, Maldives was always dependent on India for any kind of economic support, any kind of supplies. But now this was shifting. The influence was shifting towards China. From signing the Belt and Road Initiative to leasing an island, taking over strategic projects, and signing a free trade agreement, we saw the complete decline in Indian influence and the parallel rise in Chinese influence. And Yamin Gayoom went one step ahead and started promoting India Out campaign. From India First policy, we saw a complete reversal where India Out campaign was being promoted. Because see, in the defense domain, India Maldives are very close. We had signed a defense agreement back in 2009, under which India had taken some responsibility to protect the exclusive economic zone of Maldives. Since then, we have donated military assets to Maldives. We have gifted reconnaissance aircrafts such as the Dornier for maritime reconnaissance to carry out surveillance in the seas and patrol the exclusive economic zone of Maldives. We have gifted helicopters. The ALH Dhruv helicopters were gifted by India. We have even gifted naval vessels. So such military assets, military equipment were given by India to Maldives to strengthen the security of Maldives. To operate and maintain this military equipment, we had even stationed few Indian military personnel in Maldives. Around 70 to 80 Indian soldiers would be deployed by the Navy and also by the Air Force, who would operate the equipment and maintain them, thus forming a close strategic bond between India and Maldives. But Yamin Gayoom started targeting the defense relations as well. He refused to renew the visa of Indian military personnel in Maldives. He deliberately refused to renew the visa of Indian military personnel so that they'll be forced to leave the country. And he called for India Out campaign. He said that Indian military personnel should be thrown out from the country and Indian military equipment should be taken back by India. These were the negative developments that took place from 2012 to 2018. Is that clear? Then what happened? In 2018, again there was a turnaround. Fresh elections took place, and thankfully for India, the MDP, the Maldivian Democratic Party, won the elections again, and this time Ibrahim Solih became the president. Ibrahim Solih has been a good friend of India, a good close associate of Mohammad Nasheed, the former good friend of India. So Ibrahim Solih restored the India First policy immediately and started containing Chinese influence while rebuilding the lost ties with India. In fact, Ibrahim Solih's election was such a big development that Prime Minister Modi visited Maldives to attend his swearing-in ceremony. That is how important the development was. So following PM Modi's visit, the relations were restored. We announced fresh financial support amounting to $2.6 billion, which Maldives could make use of for various economic, infrastructure and developmental projects. We provided a currency swap arrangement to help Maldives overcome any financial liquidity crisis. We extended concessional loans called line of credits, which could be invested in key infrastructure projects in Maldives. As part of these investments, India took up the Greater Malay Connectivity Project, which you can see here in this map. Previously, China was involved in such connectivity projects where it had built the Sinamalay Bridge to connect the capital Malé with nearby islands. China had taken up such strategic projects under Yamin Gayoom. Now India was stepping in to build connectivity between different islands of Maldives, and we funded the Greater Malay Connectivity Project. It's a $500 million project. Out of these $500 million, $400 million is a loan, a line of credit given by India. And another $100 million is a grant that we have given. Through this investment, India is seeking to connect the capital Malé with the nearby islands of Vilingili, Gulifalu and Tilafushi. You can see that being depicted here in this map, how this bridge project will establish inter-island connectivity, how it could boost transportation and the economy and the tourist flow into Maldives. Such a key project was taken up by India, and we also made many investments in the defense sector. India took up a harbor project for the Coast Guard of Maldives at Uthuru Tilaflu, which is a strategic location where India started developing a harbor where Coast Guard ships and naval ships could be docked. So this could potentially have become a military base for India as well, where the Indian Navy, Indian Coast Guard could have docked their ships for refueling and resupplies, thus increasing the operational range of the Indian Armed Forces. So such key projects were taken up under the presidency of Ibrahim Solih. So the last 5 years were very good for India Maldives. We saw the restoration of India First policy and the containment of Chinese influence. But unfortunately, in the latest elections that took place just a few months ago, the MDP lost the elections. Ibrahim Solih lost the elections. And Dr. Mohammad Muizzu has won the election and has become the president of the country. Now, what is the problem for India here? The problem for us is that we have concerns about the ideology and the priorities of Mohammad Muizzu. Because Mohammad Muizzu is a very close associate of Yamin Gayoom. He comes from the same party as Yamin Gayoom. And he has been part of the India Out campaign. When Yamin Gayoom was leading the India Out campaign, promoting anti-India forces and sentiments, Mohammad Muizzu was one of his closest supporters. During the recent election campaign, Mohammad Muizzu said that if he is voted to power, he will ensure that Indian military equipment and military personnel are thrown out of Maldives. He won the elections by promising India out. meaning India will take back the military equipment and take back the military personnel as well. So this is what concerns India. Even after becoming the president, Mohammad Muizzu has reiterated this promise. He has said that he will stick to the election promise of removing Indian troops and asking India to take back the military equipment. So the concerns for India are pretty obvious. We are worried that Mohammad Muizzu might again be a pro-China leader like Yamin Gayoom. We are concerned that Mohammad Muizzu might adopt anti-India policies that could undercut our influence and interests. It's in this context that Prime Minister Modi has met with Mohammad Muizzu at COP28. In fact, Mohammad Muizzu bothered India again by visiting Turkey recently. After getting elected, the first foreign visit of Mohammad Muizzu was to Turkey, that is formerly Turkey. Now, this is obviously of concern for India because Turkey has unnecessarily become hostile to India. It has aligned with Pakistan. It has interfered in India's internal issues like Kashmir at United Nations and other global platforms. It has been siding with Pakistan repeatedly and taking an anti-India stand. And the first country Mohammad Muizzu visited after becoming the president is Turkey. So this is again something that bothers India. So to try and address the issues and repair the damage at the very beginning, Prime Minister Modi chose to meet with the new president at COP28 because that was an ideal venue, a neutral venue like Dubai, where India and Maldives could discuss all their issues. And both the leaders have agreed to set up a core group. They have decided to set up a core group comprising of top officials from both the countries to deepen the relationship and to promote economic relations, development cooperation, and people-to-people ties between the two countries. This appears to be a positive development, but however, after meeting Prime Minister Modi, President Muizzu has made another controversial statement. He said that India has agreed in this meeting to withdraw the troops. He has publicly stated that India has agreed to withdraw the military personnel from Maldives. India is yet to clarify on this. Officially, India hasn't commented on the statement, but it appears that if Mohammad Muizzu continues his policy, India will have no other choice. India will be forced to withdraw the military personnel. We have around 75 to 77 Indian soldiers who are stationed in Maldives. They may have to be withdrawn along with the pullout of Indian military equipment. This will undermine our defense presence, our strategic influence. We might see a parallel rise of Chinese influence. But we are not sure yet. We need to wait and watch how Mohammad Muizzu will react, how he is going to conduct the foreign policy of Maldives in the coming months. It might be a little early to comment right now, but keeping track of these developments is extremely important because we have major national interests here. With rising Chinese presence, rising security threats for India, right? There is threat from terrorism. There is threat from piracy in the region. I'm sure you know that near East Africa, near Gulf of Aden, piracy is a major threat. Organized crime is very rampant in these parts of the Indian Ocean. So to counter these security threats, we need good relations with countries like Maldives. We need to project our military influence as well. That is why Maldives is crucial for us. So let's wait and watch to see how the relations will develop. Some experts are saying that Mohammad Muizzu might balance out India and China. He may not deliberately favor China over India, rather he might balance it out. Because Mohammad Muizzu knows that he can't rely entirely on China. He has seen the recent example of Sri Lanka, how Sri Lanka relied heavily on China and eventually suffered. Sri Lanka went into a debt crisis and large part of Sri Lanka's debt burden was from China. China took over Sri Lanka's key ports like Hambantota following failed loans. And China didn't even come to the rescue of Sri Lanka when it went through an economic crisis. It was India which provided economic assistance to Sri Lanka. So Maldives would have seen that. Maldives would have drawn lessons from that. So many observers are saying that India shouldn't panic as of now. We should wait and watch because Mohammad Muizzu might have made electoral promises. Just to become a populist leader, to win elections, he might have said that he will push for India out campaign. He might even insist on it. India might even be forced to withdraw the troops and the military equipment. But still, we will have an opportunity, because if Mohammad Muizzu strikes a balance between China and India, then we can still protect our core interests. Is that clear? It might be too early to judge as of now, but definitely we need to pay attention to what happens in the next few months. UPSC will definitely focus on the topic. You can expect a mains question or even a straightforward prelims question based on what we have discussed. So please take up this practice question. I want all of you to take this up seriously. The question is directly based on what I have discussed. You can directly take the points and structure that into an answer. Is that clear? Even the discussion I have had is in the form of an answer following the same structure. So start out by explaining the background to India-Maldives relations, why Maldives is important to India. Talk about the recent political crisis, why our ties are significant and how it is dependent on the Maldivian government, what kind of investments we have, what kind of interests we have, and what threats and concerns are we facing currently. If you can present those points and those arguments in the same order, you will build a very good answer for this particular question. The question says, the recent election in Maldives has thrown up a fresh challenge to Indian national interests. Examine. Very simple, straightforward question. So in the introduction, you can talk about the importance of Maldives, its location. Then in the body, discuss the brief background to India-Maldives relations, how it has developed over the years, what challenges we faced under Yamin Gayoom, how it had been rectified by Ibrahim Solih, how India First policy was back. But the India Out campaign was always a concern for us. Then mention that Mohammad Muizzu, who won the elections, he built his campaign based on India Out campaign. He has been demanding that India should withdraw the troops and the military equipment. So discuss those aspects and then conclude by stating that we should wait and watch. We need to be ready to protect our interests, but we might see Mohammad Muizzu balancing out the ties of Maldives with both India and China, right? So on those lines, you can end the answer and provide a way forward as well as to what India can do to protect its core interests. So such questions are definitely possible. They might definitely appear in GS paper 2. Is that clear? I hope the topic is clearly understood. I'll give you a couple of minutes to ask your questions. I'll try to answer as many of them as possible, and then I'll start with the next topic. Let us see how many questions have come up. Dikshit is asking, sir, any advantage to India for keeping troops in Maldives? Obviously, when we have troops stationed in a foreign country with our military equipment, right, we can conduct surveillance operations. We can keep an eye on any adverse developments in the region and project our military influence. We can use their ports and harbors for refueling and resupplies for our ships, thus increasing the range, the operational range of our forces. So definitely having troops in a foreign country serves a big purpose, a strategic purpose. Akash is asking, sir, apart from helping Maldives in operating the aircraft provided by India, are there any other reasons why Indian military presence is there? It's primarily to help operate the equipment. But that presence is symbolic of India's military presence in Maldives. And it means we have access to their military facilities. The Indian Navy, Indian Air Force can access them if required to reach out to the area and beyond and increase our operational reach across the Indian Ocean. Bhimra is asking, we have Lakshadweep for strategic influence instead of relying on Maldives. See, even if we have Lakshadweep, Maldives will still be very, very crucial for India, right? Be it Maldives, even Mauritius, Seychelles, Sri Lanka, all the island nations will be individually important. Despite having Lakshadweep and Andaman Nicobar, the other island countries that are far away will play an important role in securing Indian interests. Shyam is asking, what's the Indian diaspora in Maldives? There is an Indian diaspora in Maldives. We do have historical cultural links with Maldives. In fact, several South Indian empires, from the days of the Cholas to the Travancore kingdom, they had a historical influence. So there are few communities that are closely connected on both the sides. In fact, Maldivians come to India very frequently to study for medical purposes, etc. And Indians primarily visit Maldives as tourists. Apart from that, there are Indian workers as well who work in Maldives, mainly in the tourism hospitality industry. Many of them are settled in Maldives as well. So we do have a strong diaspora connection and cultural connection. Harika is asking, what is a core group? Core group is a focus group of some top officials. Top officials like maybe Defense Secretary, National Security Advisor, Foreign Secretary, they will be part of the core group. The details have not been announced by the governments, but a core group is a focus group, including the top officials of both the sides who will discuss and implement the policies. Shunya is saying we can also show strategic challenges by drawing an illustrative map. Yes, if time is available, if you can draw a rough map and highlight why Maldives is important for India, you can definitely do that. Pulkit is asking, what has been Maldives' stance on China under MDP? As I told you, MDP clearly followed a India first policy, be it under Mohammad Nasheed or under Ibrahim Soleh. Both the presidents of MDP, they were pro-India. They implemented India first, meaning they gave a second priority to China while giving first priority to India. All right. So guys, these are the questions. Now let's move on to the next topic. Let's look at Gujral Doctrine. It's actually an old topic. It's a static topic. But I feel it's going to be very, very important because Gujral Doctrine was in news. It was in current affairs. Is that clear? So let's understand why it was in news. Then we'll study what is the Gujral Doctrine. We are going to analyze the Gujral Doctrine. Gujral Doctrine was laid out by former Prime Minister I.K. Gujral, Inder Kumar Gujral. You can see him in the image over here. Even before he became the Prime Minister for a short period, he had served India as the External Affairs Minister on 2 occasions. So during his term as the External Affairs Minister under Prime Minister Deve Gowda, he laid out a foreign policy doctrine called the Gujral Doctrine. In fact, even though he served a very short term as the PM, even his term as External Affairs Minister was for a very short duration. Despite short terms that he held, he is the only former Prime Minister after whom an entire foreign policy doctrine has been named. From Nehru to Modi, we have seen so many Prime Ministers making such a big contribution to Indian foreign policy. But he is the only Prime Minister after whom a foreign policy doctrine has been named officially. So what exactly is this Gujral Doctrine? How come it is so popular even today? What is its relevance in today's context? What are the successes of this doctrine? Is there any criticism against it? Is this doctrine relevant and applicable in today's context? That is something you should understand, right? So let's talk about the Gujral Doctrine, a key component of Indian foreign policy. As I told you, I.K. Gujral, even before he became the Prime Minister, he was the External Affairs Minister of India. He held the office of External Affairs Minister for the first time under V.P. Singh's government back in 1989-1990, just for around 1 year, close to 1 year. After that, under Prime Minister Deve Gowda, from 1996 to 1997, for another 1 year term, he became the External Affairs Minister. That is when he laid down the principles of Gujral Doctrine. It consists of 5 core principles. Is that clear? He popularized this and implemented this as well after becoming the Prime Minister. And it continued to have relevance in Indian foreign policy for a very long time. In fact, some principles at least are relevant even today in India's foreign policy. He brought out the 5 principles while delivering a speech at Chatham House, which is a very popular think tank in London in 1996. So let us see which are these 5 principles, what do they talk about, and how it was implemented. You can see the 5 principles of Gujral doctrine over here. This is just a typo in the formatting. Please make a correction. You can see the 4 principles, the 5th one over here. So you can see all the 5 principles on this slide. First, I will read it out word by word. Then I'll explain them and we will analyze them as well. The first principle states that with the neighbors like Nepal, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Maldives, and Sri Lanka, India does not ask for reciprocity, but gives all that it can in good faith and trust. That is the first principle. Now you need to understand the context in which the doctrine was introduced. 1990s was a difficult period for India. By 1995, India's image had been very badly affected, negatively affected in the neighborhood. We had a problematic relationship with almost every neighboring country. With Pakistan, of course, the relations were already damaged because of the Kashmir dispute, the wars, the issue of terrorism, and whatnot. Even with Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, with all these major neighbors except for Bhutan, our ties had been badly affected. There was a strong accusation against India that India was acting like a big brother, that India was dominating the South Asia region by interfering in the internal matters of neighboring countries. This, to an extent, was true. India would excessively interfere in Nepal, in Sri Lanka as well, and we just discussed the military intervention in Maldives. In Bangladesh, of course, we played a direct role, not just in liberating the country, but even after that. So the constant Indian interference in the politics of neighboring countries, in the internal matters of neighboring countries, had given rise to a bad reputation for India, that India was acting like a dominating big brother. So to correct this image, to create a positive, soft image of India, Gujral came up with this principle. The principle that we will not expect anything from our neighbors. If you observe closely, he has not mentioned Pakistan in this statement. There is no Pakistan here. Except for Pakistan, with all the other neighbors of India, we will provide assistance in good faith and trust without expecting reciprocity. Because generally in international relations, relations are based on reciprocity. You give something and you get something in return. But India adopted a different approach here. We said we will give, we will provide, we will not expect anything in return. The return will come automatically. The focus here was to create a goodwill for India, build a positive image and a reputation for India that we are not just a dominating big brother, rather a friend whom the neighbors can trust and rely upon. This was the core tenet of Gujral doctrine. From here onwards, we started assisting our neighbors without any expectation. And this is a principle that remains relevant even today. Even today, we help our neighbors without expecting anything immediately, right? We don't place conditions on them. We try to restrict our interference and we provide any kind of assistance that they want. The second principle, no South Asian country will allow its territory to be used against the interests of another country in the region. Because at that point in 1990s, we just came out of the Cold War period. It had become a habit for every country to use their soil for interfering in another country. Meaning one country which is hostile to another, they would host radical groups or extremist groups which would threaten the other country, and they would use them as a leverage in their foreign policy. India said, let's not do this anymore. Let's not allow South Asian countries and their territories to be used against each other. We also committed that we shall not interfere in the internal affairs of another. Will not meddle in the politics of another country. Will not try to manipulate elections. Will not try to sponsor any kind of extremism or instability in the neighboring countries. And we said that all South Asian countries must respect each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty. We will not question the territorial integrity of the other. We'll respect the boundaries. And whatever disputes exist, we will resolve them through peaceful bilateral negotiations. Even if there are disputes will be there. We will resolve them peacefully through bilateral negotiations, meaning there will not be any third party involved. Without any third party involvement, the two countries will sit and peacefully talk and negotiate to resolve any dispute. So this was the roadmap that was laid down by I.K. Gujral as the Foreign Minister of India. Even though it was implemented for a short period, it had a long-lasting impact. Now let me provide you the analysis, a deeper analysis, and then we'll look at the success and the criticism. Under Gujral Doctrine, India did follow a non-domineering attitude towards the neighbors. As I told you, our image had been compromised by 1990s. We had a negative image that India is a big country meddling in the smaller countries. So through Gujral Doctrine, we could correct that image. We could move away from this domineering attitude, this dominating approach, and work for the mutual benefit of both the sides. Because of Gujral Doctrine, India managed to keep the negotiations going on. We stopped any kind of unnecessary provocations. We stopped meddling in the internal matters of the neighboring countries, and we didn't make any kind of provocative statements to trigger the other country. And another very, very important point, our ties which had been affected with Bangladesh, Nepal and Sri Lanka saw a major improvement from 1990s and early 2000. Post 96, our ties really started improving with some of our neighboring countries, and you can see the results even today. Then, by excluding Pakistan, Gujral was not targeting Pakistan. Please understand that. Even though Pakistan was not mentioned in the first principle, Pakistan would also be a beneficiary of Gujral Doctrine. In fact, I.K. Gujral was a firm believer in friendly ties between India and Pakistan. At a time when our tensions were very high, I.K. Gujral played a big role in building some kind of friendship in the partnership, in the relationship. He relaxed the travel restrictions. The visa norms, which were very strict, were relaxed to allow Pakistani nationals, tourists, and businessmen to easily travel to India in order to boost cultural ties, economic ties, and people-to-people relations. These were the positives that we could see, and there was some success because of Gujral Doctrine. It did strengthen trust in the region, built better cooperation between India and some of the neighboring countries. For example, it's because of Gujral Doctrine that the Ganga Water Sharing Treaty was possible between India and Bangladesh. Until then, we were placing a condition on Bangladesh that we will sign the Ganga Water Sharing Treaty only if you provide transit access to Northeast India. This had always been a point of division between India and Bangladesh. But now, since India was not expecting reciprocity, we would only give with a good intention. India unilaterally agreed for the water sharing treaty, and thus the Ganga Water Sharing Treaty was signed when Sheikh Hasina became the Prime Minister for the first time in Bangladesh in 1996. We didn't expect Sheikh Hasina to grant transit access immediately, but eventually the positive came back. The positive development came back to influence India because Sheikh Hasina, when she came back to power in 2009, she gave transit access to India, the much needed transit access to connect with Northeast India. With Bhutan as well, there was a canal that India, Bhutan were considering, and we obtained Bhutanese consent for digging a canal from a Bhutanese river to increase the water flow in the Ganga river. It was a water deal where a canal would be dug to divert some part of Bhutan's river into the Ganga to increase water flow in the Ganga. So this was another important development that happened because of Gujral Doctrine. These are just some examples I'm giving you. Nepal was also brought on India's side by agreeing for revision of the Mahakali Treaty. The Mahakali Treaty had been a source of dispute with regard to sharing of the Mahakali River, right? But India unilaterally agreed for a concession, and we ensured the treaty would favor Nepal and meet Nepal's interests in order to win goodwill in Nepal. So these were some examples of the success of Gujarat Doctrine. It had a long-lasting positive impact on our neighborly relations with our neighboring countries. In fact, the future leaders, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, Manmohan Singh, even they would continue this approach in several instances, even though they came from different parties and with different ideologies. If you look at Vajpayee's approach towards Pakistan, Nepal, if you look at Manmohan Singh's approach towards Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, they were based on some principles of Gujarat Doctrine. So indeed, there was a success from Gujarat Doctrine. There was a positive impact. But of course, there was some criticism as well. There was a downside to it. The biggest failure was in convincing the concerned stakeholders in following the doctrine. The Ministry of External Affairs and Indian diplomats from the IFS and the Research and Analysis Wing, which is India's foreign intelligence agency, they opposed the Gujarat Doctrine because through the Gujarat Doctrine, India was making unilateral concessions without the leverage of coercive, forceful diplomacy, right? You can't really protect your interests. Sometimes in diplomacy, you have to meddle in other countries. You have to interfere in the internal issues of other countries in order to protect your interests. So MEA and RAW, they resisted the implementation of the doctrine. It was not entirely followed and implemented. And as Gujral enforced the doctrine, it negatively impacted RAW's covert operations capabilities in the neighborhood. RAW was ordered to shut down its covert operations in Pakistan and in several countries. This affected the intelligence gathering capabilities of RAW, which would compromise India's national security. Gujral was criticized for being too idealistic and going soft on Pakistan, even when it kept sponsoring terrorism against India because of his belief in Gujarat Doctrine. So this can be the criticism if you look at it from the other side. But you need to appreciate I.K. Gujral for his far-sightedness and for the approach he took towards the neighboring countries. Maybe the time wasn't just right, but this would be the ideal policy for India to follow with our neighbors, provided if everything was good and stable in the region. But given the problems in South Asia, especially from Pakistan, the policy was not very well suited for Indian interests. So over the years, Gujarat Doctrine and its principles have lost their relevance. Some principles are still relevant. For example, principle number 1 is still relevant. We do help Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Maldives unilaterally. We don't expect anything in return from them. We help them in good faith and trust. And principle 5, even this is relevant. We still believe that all disputes can be resolved through peaceful bilateral negotiations. But principle 2, 3, and 4 are not very relevant because it's impossible in geopolitics to not meddle in another country. It's impossible to not interfere, or else you may not be able to protect your interests. So I would say 2, 3, 4 are not relevant today. In the last 20 years, we have not really followed it. But principle 1 and 5, they definitely remain relevant. We do follow this even today in some way or the other. So this is my short analysis on the Gujarat Doctrine. It's a static topic, but the question can come. Now, why was this in current affairs? Why was the topic from 1990s in current affairs? It's because last week was the death anniversary of I.K. Gujral. 30th November was the death anniversary of I.K. Gujral. It's in that context I've picked the topic. And given the focus on India's neighborhood, UPSC might pick a question on this. So take up a practice question. Illustrate the 5 principles of Gujarat Doctrine and critically examine its relevance to Indian foreign policy in today's context. So this completes the second topic. Now, let me take a quick look at any questions and doubts. Any questions on Gujarat Doctrine? Annie is asking, sir, should we learn the 5 principles word to word in order to write the answer? Preferably, yes, because this is Gujaral's doctrine. If you are presenting that in an answer, you should be able to write those principles in the same order, right? You don't have to by heart it, but I think with enough practice and with a conceptual understanding, you can present these points on your own. Sir, please explain the second point briefly. Pravalika and Sahiti, both of them are asking it. Okay, I'll come back here. Second point. No South Asian country will allow its territory to be used against the interest of another country of the region. Now see, for example, there is an accusation that Bangladesh has hosted few anti-India groups on its soil. There is an allegation that India has hosted few anti-Sri Lankan groups, like Tamil militant groups. Correct? That is an example of one country using its territory, its soil, and hosting groups that are targeting the other neighboring country and using it as a leverage in foreign policy. So under second principle, a promise was made that we shall not allow our territory to be used against the other country. Meaning we'll not entertain any kind of extremist forces that pose a threat to the other country. Is that clear? So that is the meaning of the second principle. Today, no MCQ questions. We will have MCQ questions as well. It's a mix of prelims and mains topics, right? That is the new format that we are introducing. In the later topics, which are smaller topics that are relevant for prelims, I have few MCQs for you as well. We'll come to it, don't worry. Anjali is asking how India is not respecting territorial integrity, sovereignty of other countries. See, sometimes when it comes to, let's say, the land boundary issue, for example, with Nepal, we have a boundary dispute. With Sri Lanka, we have the fishermen dispute, which is related to our maritime boundary line. With Bangladesh, we had the enclave issue, the land boundary issue. Because of our conflicting claims, the other country will feel that our claims are threatening their integrity and sovereignty. Previously, India was very aggressive in its approach. Because of Gujarat Doctrine, we moderated our approach and we promised that we will not threaten the integrity and sovereignty of the other country. In fact, in last 30 years, or in fact, even before that, India has never challenged the territorial integrity or sovereignty of the other nation. So we were reiterating that as a policy in our foreign policy doctrine. Is that clear? Meaning will not pose a threat to the integrity, sovereignty of the other nation. Will not question their boundaries, will not get into conflicts. Any dispute is there, will resolve it through talks, through negotiations. That is the commitment India made. Pooja is asking, sir, does it include China as well? No, it didn't apply for China. It applied only for South Asian neighbors of India. All right. So guys, these are some of the questions. Now let's move on to the third topic. The third topic is from Myanmar. There have been a lot of adverse developments in Myanmar. In the last 1 month, there have been some major developments which has a direct impact on India. There is a rebel offensive going on in Myanmar which directly bothers India and concerns India. So we need to understand this in detail. The context is that, as I told you, in the last 1.5 months, since October 27th, some of the ethnic armed groups of Myanmar have carried out a major offensive operation targeting the military junta. I hope you know that Myanmar is under a military dictatorship since 2021. It's back under military rule and it is facing opposition from various political parties and armed ethnic groups. Some of these ethnic groups have staged a major operation since October 27th and they have managed to seize significant territory from the military. This is the first time that Myanmar's military junta is facing a challenge with regard to its stability and territorial control. So this is what we need to study and understand in detail. First, let me give you the slight background, the basic background that you need, and then we'll talk about the current developments. See, this crisis that Myanmar is facing right now, it goes back to 2021. In 2020-2021, Myanmar was headed for fresh elections. Democratic elections were held in the country and the NLD, the National League for Democracy, which is headed by Aung San Suu Kyi, the Nobel Peace Laureate, her party had again won the elections. Now, just for the sake of context, let me tell you that from 1962 to 2010, Myanmar had been under military rule. There had been no democracy in the country. The military dictatorship had completely taken over. It had even crushed any pro-democracy movement that took root back in 1980s. In 1988-89, Aung San Suu Kyi, you can see her in the image, she had led a major pro-democracy movement through her party, the National League for Democracy. This pro-democracy movement had been crushed by the military, and the military rule continued for a good 5 decades, from 1962 to 2010. Following the crushing of the pro-democracy movement in 1980s and the arrest of Aung San Suu Kyi, Western countries placed economic sanctions on Myanmar. They targeted Myanmar with economic sanctions to punish the military leaders because they were violating democratic rights and human rights. Now, these economic sanctions of Western countries finally had an impact. It brought the military under pressure. Myanmar's economy was squeezed by Western countries following decades of sanctions. So finally, in the year 2010 till 2020, throughout this decade, Myanmar made a partial transition towards a democracy. In 2010, constitutional changes were carried out by the military leaders and a nominal civilian government was installed, meaning the military stepped aside and allowed for partial elections to take place in 2010. They were looking to please the Western countries, hoping they would lift the sanctions. But since it was just a partial transition, it was not a full, free and fair election that they allowed. Only some seats were allowed for elections, whereas majority seats were still reserved for military officers. So it was not a true democracy. So Western countries did not lift the sanctions. Finally, in 2015, they introduced more reforms and democracy was brought back in Myanmar. And as a result, NLD, headed by Aung San Suu Kyi, won the elections and formed a democratic government in 2015. It even completed one term until 2020. So as Myanmar made this transition, Western countries had even lifted the sanctions. For around 5 years, the sanctions had been lifted. It appeared that Myanmar was becoming more stable and democratic institutions were taking root. Western countries were trying to get closer to the government of Myanmar. But despite all these positive changes, the underlying fact in Myanmar was that the military would never give up its control over power. Myanmar's military has always been power hungry. Even during partial democracy, the military kept violating human rights by targeting the Rohingya community. The ethnic Muslims of Rakhine state in western Myanmar, they are the Rohingyas. The whole community was targeted by the military and the radical Buddhists, and they committed a genocide against Rohingya Muslims, triggering a major refugee crisis in the region. Similarly, various other ethnic groups like the Chins, the Kachins, and the others, they were all oppressed by the military even when Myanmar had transitioned into a democracy. In 2020, when the next elections were held, the NLD was about to win the elections again. Basically, democracy was becoming popular. NLD was being accepted by the people because people of Myanmar were frustrated with military dictatorship. They wanted democratic rights. They wanted free rights. So as NLD was about to sweep the election, the military was now worried. They worried that if they allow democracy to continue, NLD will become popular, Aung San Suu Kyi will become even more popular, and the military will lose control over power. Until then, they had somehow maintained a dual control. Even though the military had stepped aside, they still maintained dual control over power, like Pakistan. The elected government was just for the namesake. Real power was still under the authority of the military, under the control of the military. Now they feared that if democracy continues, if the election results are made valid, then NLD will become even more popular and the military will lose control. So driven by this fear and their greed for power, the military nullified the elections in 2020. The election results were declared as fraud without any evidence, and they cancelled the election results. And in February 2021, national emergency was declared and the military captured power and threw out the elected government. So since then, Myanmar has been in a state of crisis and it directly impacts India. Is that clear? As soon as the military took over and abolished democracy again, the political parties and the people of Myanmar, they rebelled against the military. The NLD, the major political party which was about to form the government, which had won the elections, it aligned with other political groups and it has formed a national unity government in exile. Basically, it has created a parallel government. A civilian parallel government has been formed by all the political parties which are fighting for democracy in the country. And these civilian protesters have been brutally targeted by the military. In the last 1.5 years, the military has crushed the civilian movement, the pro-democracy movement. In fact, it's been 2 years plus, and the military has been crushing the protests. It has already killed hundreds of civilians, tortured many of them, arrested several of them, and it has committed grave human rights violations in the country. So the rebel groups that are present in Myanmar, there are various ethnic militant groups similar to Northeast India. They all have a long-standing conflict with the military. Now, all these rebel militias have also united and they have backed the civilian democratic government in exile. So all the rebel militant groups have formed a coalition called the People's Defense Forces by drawing the ethnic armed organizations from various ethnic groups. There are different ethnic groups, indigenous communities in Myanmar like the Karen, the Kachin, the Chins, the Karenni, and many others. Even the Rohingyas. All these ethnic groups, which have their own militant armed groups, they've all come together to form the People's Defense Forces to declare a rebel war against the military. So the political civilian forces led by NLD and the People's Defense Forces, which is the tribal militia, both are fighting against the military to throw out the military from power and establish democracy in the country. And in the last 1.5 months, they have seen a major success. For the first time, Myanmar's military is under threat. The military junta is under threat because a coalition of 3 militant organizations have seen a big success in their operations against Myanmar's military. They have formed a group called the Three Brotherhood Alliance, the TBA. Please remember the name. It's going to be very important for your prelims. The Three Brotherhood Alliance is a grouping of 3 militant organizations: Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, the Tang National Liberation Army, and the Arakan Army. These 3 are ethnic armed organizations representing different ethnic groups of Myanmar. They have united to launch a joint war against the military, and they launched Operation 1027. Kindly remember the name of this operation, Operation 1027. It is named after the date on which it was launched, 10th October 2023. Sorry, the date was 27th October. Kindly correct this. The date was 27th October. 10 is the month. October is the 10th month. And the date on which the operation was launched was 27th October. That's why the operation was codenamed as Operation 1027. The 10th month, that is October, 27 is the date. So this was a planned joint operation by the Three Brotherhood Alliance. So this was the first time that such a coordinated operation was being seen amongst different ethnic groups, and they've managed to deliver a huge blow to Myanmar's military and its control over territory. The resistance forces, they have captured hundreds of military outposts and bases, especially in the Shan state. Shan state is in the northeastern part of Myanmar, bordering China. You can see here in the map. This is China. This is the Yunnan province of China. It borders the Shan state of Myanmar. It's a vital state that shares this boundary with China, and there are important border points here between Myanmar and China. This is crucial for Myanmar's connectivity with China and also for getting trade and investments from China. In the crucial Shan state, the Three Brotherhood Alliance, they have mounted a major offensive, captured several critical locations, including Chin Shui Ha, which is a border town. It's a border trading town on the China-Myanmar border in the Shan state. The rebels have captured this critical location, the whole city, along with several towns and military posts. They have been captured by the rebel forces, marking a major defeat for Myanmar's military junta. And the violence is not just limited to the Shan state. It has spread to other parts of Myanmar, closer to India's borders. I told you, right? It's a joint operation, a coordinated operation by different ethnic groups. If Three Brotherhood Alliance have launched this operation in the Shan state, there are other rebel groups towards India which have launched similar operations and captured territory. Now, see, this is of great significance for India because India shares a 1,600-kilometer plus border with Myanmar, Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, then more importantly, Manipur and Mizoram. These are the four northeastern states of India sharing a direct land boundary with Myanmar. For India, Myanmar has always been critical to stabilize the northeast region, to counter northeast insurgency. Because several northeast insurgents, they've crossed this border easily and found support in Myanmar. There are many local ethnic groups who support them. Some ethnic groups have connections with Myanmar's military. They've easily sourced drugs, funds, and weapons from Myanmar to wage this war against India. India also believes that China has used Myanmar as a base to sponsor some of the Northeast rebels against India as part of its covert war against India. So for India, it has always been crucial to maintain stability along the border, to maintain security, and have good relations with the military junta in order to counter the security threats. So now these developments that are happening right next to our border is of direct consequence for India. Because the rebel groups, they have launched joint coordinated operations in the Rakhine state as well, that borders India and Bangladesh. Several Rohingya groups have also started their operations, captured some territory. In the Kayan state in southeast Myanmar, even here a major rebellion has broken out. In the Sagaing region that borders our Manipur, which has already been witnessing ethnic violence since the last few months, even there, violence has broken out, and in the Sagaing region, many territories have been captured by the rebels. You can see here in the map, you can see a place called Comfort. Let me show it to you. This is where Comfort is located. It's in the Sagaing region of Myanmar, just a few kilometers away from Moreh. This is Moreh. Moreh is on the Indian side in Manipur. It's a border town on the side of India. On the other side, the border town is Comfort. This is what connects our Manipur with Myanmar. Now, have you heard of the Trilateral Highway Project, the IMT Highway? India, Myanmar, Thailand Highway? This critical project of India, which is part of our Look East, Act East policy, is passing through Moreh and Comfort. It connects our Moreh in Manipur, which is a border commercial town, with Comfort in Myanmar and passes through Myanmar and reaches Thailand. Along this strategic route, rebels have captured this border town called Comfort. Similarly, on the Mizoram border, there is an important checkpoint at Zov Khathar. That is the last Indian town, the border town in Mizoram. On the other side, you have Rikwadar, which is a Myanmar town. This strategic border town near the Mizoram border also has been captured by the Chin rebels. Now, don't forget, the Chins of Myanmar are connected to Mizos and the Kuki-Zo community in India. The Chins of Myanmar have an ethnic connection, a familial cultural connection with Mizos of Mizoram and the Kuki-Zo community of Manipur, who have been at the center of the latest ethnic violence in Manipur, where they have clashed with Meitei armed groups. So what happens in Myanmar has a direct bearing on India. The latest violence in Manipur has been connected to the developments that have taken place in Myanmar. Several Kuki Zo refugees who have come in because of the violence have been blamed by the Meiteis for occupying their land, for even producing drugs and smuggling drugs, which became a flashpoint between the Meiteis and the Kuki Zo community. The Kukis have rejected these allegations. They have opposed the granting of scheduled tribe status to Meiteis, which triggered the ethnic armed violence between the Kuki Zo community and the Meitei community. Even in Mizoram, the Chin refugees who have come in, right, they have been accommodated by Mizos on the other side, because the Manipuris, the Kukis especially, and the Meiteis, right, even though Meiteis have no connection with the ethnic groups of Myanmar, the Kukis have a close connection. The Kuki Zomi community are connected. Mizos of Mizoram are connected to Chins. So they have accommodated the refugees who have come in, posing a refugee problem for India as well. And now that these border towns have been captured by the rebels, Myanmar's army officials also have fled to India. In the last 1 month, we have received 5,000 refugees. Most of them were Myanmar's military officials. They lost the war to the rebels and fled to India for refuge. India had to accommodate them and eventually send them back because we have close ties with the military junta. So the developments happening here, the loss of territory that the military junta has seen, has direct impact on India, right? We can't determine whether it will be for the good or the bad. It's very hard to say that right now, but any such continued violence and instability is bad news for India. It could further enable Northeast insurgents. Continued instability and lack of democracy, continued violence could have a devastating impact on India. We might even see rising Chinese influence, because many experts believe that China has a role in Operation 1027. Because this is the first time that Myanmar's ethnic rebel groups have carried out such a coordinated attack. This is unprecedented. Of course, they have a strong motivation to fight for their rights, their democracy, etc., right? Because they hate the military. But there is something else which is happening. Reports are saying that China is unhappy with the military junta. Even though China is a good friend of Myanmar, it has always supported the military. It has supplied weapons, made big investments, right? Myanmar is part of Belt and Road Initiative through the China-Myanmar Economic Corridor. China has supplied weapons along with Russia to strengthen Myanmar's military. Despite all the close strategic defense relations and economic relations, it's being reported that China has a major problem with the military. The problem is that in the border region, there is a huge online gambling scandal which has developed. Many scam centers have come up in Myanmar where Myanmar's military officers are involved in organized criminal activities with criminal cartels who are conducting online gambling scams targeting Chinese citizens. Now, these online scams, which have increased, it has become an economic threat to China, and it is affecting Chinese citizens on a large scale. So China has been trying to crack down on these criminal enclaves that promote online gambling scams. And as part of these tensions between China and Myanmar, recently there was an incident near the border where few Chinese nationals were killed by some of the border forces of Myanmar. It happened in the Shan state, in the Kokang region, where some of the border forces of Myanmar's military, they killed few Chinese nationals because of these tensions. And some of those who were killed were Chinese agents, undercover police and intelligence agents. So this apparently has infuriated China. So the flourishing online scam business, along with increased security threats, is what could have pushed China to support the rebel groups to counter the military. So that is what many experts are indicating. And if these reports are true, then it is of concern for India. It means China is in a position to dictate the terms to Myanmar's military, which means China can misuse this leverage to target India as well, to undermine the Indian influence and to further destabilize Northeast India. So that is what India is really worried about. So India has taken a balanced position on this. Historically, we have maintained very close ties with the military junta. Even when the military junta was committing human rights violations, even though when it was committing genocides, curbing democracy and crushing civilians, India would remain silent because we were following a realistic foreign policy. In order to counter China and its influence and to stabilize Northeast India, to counter Northeast insurgency, we needed the help of the military junta. So India became very close to the military, just like China. After China, India is the most influential with very good ties with the military junta. Even we have made big investments like the IMT highway project, the Kaladan project. We have supplied weapons to Myanmar's military. Recently, India donated a submarine. We have gifted a submarine to Myanmar's navy. We conduct military exercises with Myanmar's military. We share intelligence. We conduct joint operations as well. That is the kind of close relations we have with the military. We have maintained those ties without criticizing the military internally because we want to counter China and we want to secure the boundary and counter Northeast insurgency. So as a result, we have maintained this balanced position where we don't criticize the military directly. We don't call for democracy or any changes openly. We just express concern about the deterioration in democracy in Myanmar. On the other hand, we would like the military to remain strong and stable because the enhanced violence that has been witnessed recently could encourage several rebel groups to become stronger, and their ties with Northeast insurgents is something that bothers India. So India would like normalcy to be restored as soon as possible. So we need to wait and watch how things will develop in Myanmar. The connections some of these ethnic groups have with Northeast rebels and the growing weakness of Myanmar's military is posing a major threat because this is a civil war situation. And the absence of a strong government, the absence of any kind of law and order is a conducive environment for criminals and insurgents to flourish. China will exploit this to the maximum advantage. It might further its covert war against India by increasing support for Northeast insurgents through Myanmar. So there are very real threats for India. The increased Chinese influence, the growing instability, which is derailing our projects, the IMT highway, Kaladan project, they've all been derailed and delayed from a long time. So this is a big hit to our Act East policy. Because under the Act East policy, Myanmar is crucial for India to connect with Southeast Asian and East Asian countries. Myanmar is like a bridge that connects India with Southeast Asia and East Asia. And such continued destabilization is not good for India. Is that clear? So that is what we understand from these recent developments. And you should anticipate a mains question based on this. Of course, there can be prelims questions as well, based on some of the locations and Operation 1027, the Three Brotherhood Alliance that I have mentioned. But from mains, you can expect a question like this. The growing instability in Myanmar poses a major challenge for Indian interests in the region. Discuss. So you should be able to relate these developments that have happened recently, the possible Chinese involvement, how the rebels have organized and posed a big threat to Myanmar's military and its control, and how it could affect Indian interests. Right? That is the connection you need to make, and you should be prepared for this topic. Now let's move on to the next topic. The next few topics are relatively smaller. They are largely prelims oriented. So first, let me look at your doubts, your questions, and then quickly I'll take up the remaining topics. Varsha is asking, sir, can we mention Chinese angle behind Myanmar's instability? Yes, you can say that. Observers, experts are pointing out a possible Chinese involvement in backing some of the rebel forces. You can mention it. But of course, it should be based on media reports. You can say that it's been reported in the media, or observers, strategic experts are pointing out that China might be involved in backing the rebels. Pulkit is asking why Gujarat Doctrine doesn't mention Myanmar in the first principle. That's because Gujarat Doctrine was meant only for South Asia. Myanmar is not a South Asian country, it's a Southeast Asian country. KY is asking, China is a supporter of rebels or military junta. China backs both. By backing the military junta and the rebels, it maintains leverage in Myanmar. Sanskar is asking, US has fought war for democracy in Vietnam, North Korea, Iraq, etc. Why are they now ignoring Myanmar? Why US never invaded Myanmar? See, circumstances have been different. US invasion that you're talking about, those were largely Cold War policies of the US. If you talk about US military involvement in Vietnam, in Korea, they were all a relic of the Cold War era, where US was locked in a conflict with the Soviet Union, right? Myanmar has been a different case entirely. The Americans were never driven to that extent to get directly involved in Myanmar. They thought sanctions would work, right? And in Myanmar, it would not just be the Soviets, but China as well, that US would have to fight. Because along with the Soviets, later Russia, China also has been very influential, powerful in Myanmar, right? So various circumstances are there. You can't really compare Vietnam with Myanmar. The situation is entirely different. Also, Myanmar descended into more dictatorship only after the Cold War declined and ended, right? So all these factors have a role to play. Munna is asking, is it not costly for India to maintain relations with small countries? Not really. See, we have a set budget for foreign policy. We have few set allocations for various countries. So India being a large country, a large economy, we can maintain ties with all the major countries, including the small countries. Rimpal is asking, India can support democracy in Myanmar and make it more stable like Bangladesh. See, Myanmar is not as easy as Bangladesh, right? In Bangladesh, it was a genocide that Pakistan had committed. Their backing the Bengali liberation movement was a national interest for India. In Myanmar, things are different. The situation is so complicated that if India does get involved, it will most likely backfire. As I told you, we need the military. Even today, the military junta has a strong control. We need Myanmar's military to stabilize our border and to counter the threats against India. So India would never ever make the mistake of unnecessarily interfering in Myanmar against the interests of the military. Okay, so guys, these were the questions. Now, let's quickly take up the smaller topics that we are left with. We had an article last week regarding the safety of workers in the industry. The International Labour Organization had brought out a report, and some of its conventions regarding the safety and the occupational health of workers was in news. This report brought out by the ILO, the International Labour Organization, has pointed out that across countries, the governments and the industry, they have to strengthen the safety net for workers, because due to work-related factors, there are several deaths that are occurring every year. According to the report, around 30 lakh workers are getting killed every single year due to work-related factors. It could be stress due to overwork. It could be hazardous conditions at a workplace, lack of safety measures. It could be occupational hazards. So because of these various causes, around 3 million workers, that is 30 lakh workers across the world, are losing their lives directly because of work-related accidents, diseases, etc. So the issue it highlights is the issue of occupational health and the safety of workers at workplace. According to the report, 63% of these deaths are from Asia Pacific region, meaning across the Asian region, especially in the developing, underdeveloped countries, these worker deaths are more. The health and safety of workers is largely ignored and neglected in such developing, underdeveloped countries. That is what you learn from this report. The report is titled A Call for Safer and Healthier Working Environment, which was tabled at the 23rd World Congress on Safety and Health at Work, which was held in Sydney. This World Congress on Occupational Safety took place in Australia. That is where the ILO report was presented. And the report identifies the three most dangerous industries. Please write this down. You can get a prelims question here. Mining and quarrying, construction and utilities. These are the three most hazardous sectors globally identified by the International Labour Organization. You recently saw what happened in Uttarakhand, the tunnel collapse and how 41 workers were trapped. That is a classic example of workers' lives being risked due to poor occupational safety and health standards. Correct? So mining and quarrying, followed by construction and utilities. These are the three most hazardous industries for the safety of workers in the world. Now, please look at this graph. It's very, very important. Remember the three major contributing factors for the death of workers at workplace and the risk to occupational health and safety. The biggest contributor is long working hours. Recently, Narayan Murthy, the founder of Infosys, triggered a controversy by saying that Indians have to work for 70 plus hours per week. But ILO data is showing that if workers are forced to work more than 55 hours per week, this is directly contributing to 7.45 lakh deaths due to stress, cardiovascular diseases, lifestyle related diseases, as workers do not have enough time to take care of their personal well-being. Due to compromised diet, lack of exercise, lack of relaxation, workers are put under a lot of stress. Those who are working more than 55 hours per week out of force, out of compulsion, who are being exploited in the industry, they are reporting such stress-related conditions, diseases, disorders, and eventual death. 7.45 lakh workers have lost their lives due to overwork. That is the biggest killer in the industry, followed by hazardous material and exposure to it, like particulate matter, harmful gases, and fumes. In chemical industries, in hazardous industries, workers are exposed to all these toxic gases, chemicals, particulate matter, etc. That becomes the second biggest killer, followed by injuries suffered at workplace, especially in factories, right? Workers can suffer a variety of injuries if safety standards, protocols are not followed. These are the three biggest killers at workplace. This is pointed out by the report as well, so please make a note of it. Now, in this report, the ILO has made a mention of two important conventions that could be relevant for your prelims. When it comes to occupational safety and health, there are around 40 various principles, codes, and conventions of the ILO that are present. In total, there are 40 standards that ILO has specified through various guidelines, conventions, frameworks, etc. Out of that, there are two conventions which are very important. Convention number 187, Convention number 155. These conventions provide for a promotional framework for occupational safety and health, and it deals with occupational safety and health and recommends a national policy where governments will work with the private industries and other stakeholders to create a safe environment for the workers. Convention number 187 and 155. 187 deals with a national law for comprehensive protection of workers, where governments can bring out a national framework which will be followed by the corporates, private industry, and the companies and factories to ensure that worker safety is promoted and preventive safety and health culture is promoted. Is that clear? And Convention 155 calls for a national policy. So these two are important conventions with regard to labor welfare. It also deals with child labor, exploitative labor, forced labor. All such hazardous conditions are dealt with, and India has not ratified both the conventions. India has not ratified both these conventions. Around 79 countries out of 187 members have ratified Convention 155. Around 62 countries out of 187 have ratified Convention 187. So you can see that the adoption of these ILO conventions is very, very low. That is one reason why occupational safety and health is not a priority for various countries. India itself has not ratified both the conventions because India feels that these conventions will place a lot of burden on the Indian industry. We won't be able to follow these high standards as a developing nation. So India has not ratified both the conventions. Understood? So be prepared for a prelims question on such ILO conventions. Take up this practice question. Consider the following statements. The ILO constitution sets forth the principle that workers must be protected from sickness, disease, and injury arising from their employment. That's the first statement. Second, all ILO members have ratified Convention 155-187 on occupational safety and health. India has not ratified both the conventions. How many of these statements are correct? It's a straightforward question. Of course, I've mentioned all the points, but still, you have to be familiar with the kind of questions, the format of questions that can be asked. Based on current affairs, such basic questions can appear. Now, let me launch a poll. Let us see how many of you can get it right. I'm hoping 100% have to get it right because it is a straightforward question, right? So let's see how many of you can go ahead and give me the right answer. I'll give you 15 seconds. Read the question again if you want. And please, all of you should attempt this question. 5 seconds to go. Very good. 65% have given the right answer. Option B. Only 2 statements are correct. The first statement and third statement are correct. Second statement is incorrect. I can't believe that some of you got it wrong because see, I told you, not all countries have ratified it. Just few countries, around 69 and 72 countries have ratified these conventions. I told you that the adoption rate is very low. That's what makes the second statement incorrect. It's saying all ILO members have ratified it. No, it's incorrect. India itself has not ratified both the conventions. So 1 and 3 are correct. So only 2 statements are right. Option B becomes the correct answer. Next topic is from Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has reached a deal with India and the Paris Club of Creditor Countries. This is related to Sri Lanka's economic crisis. As you know, Sri Lanka has been going through a major economic crisis since last year, and it is eagerly awaiting a bailout package from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. The IMF is ready to give a $3 billion bailout package, but this package from IMF is conditional. It has placed a condition that the existing foreign debt of Sri Lanka has to be restructured by the creditor countries, meaning those who have given loans to Sri Lanka, which became the foreign debt burden on the Sri Lankan economy, they have to restructure the loan. Only if the restructuring is done by the creditors, only then IMF will provide this bailout package to Sri Lanka. It has received one initial tranche of the extended facility, that IMF has given. Part of it has been released to help Sri Lanka survive without going bankrupt. But to release the entire bailout package of $3 billion, this condition has to be met. It has to restructure the pending debt with its creditors. So this deal has been worked out between Sri Lanka, India, Japan, and the Paris Club of Creditors. So let's understand quickly as to why this is important. Sri Lanka's economic crisis that began last year is primarily a result of its excessive foreign borrowing. The Sri Lankan governments, especially the Rajapaksa governments, they borrowed heavily from the international markets. The market borrowings stood at 47% of Sri Lanka's total debt. in 2021, 2022, when the crisis hit Sri Lanka, its total debt burden had crossed $51 billion, and Sri Lanka was in no position to repay the foreign debt. It owes 47% of these loans to the international market. Other than that, it has borrowed from some countries heavily. 10% of its debt is from Japan, another 10% from China, from global institutions like World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and as well as from India. Around 2% of Sri Lanka's debt burden is from India. Is that clear? So these are the major creditors. Few foreign institutions, the international markets, and countries like India, Japan, and China. So now the condition for Sri Lanka to get this bailout package is to restructure these loans by striking a deal with the creditors. For this purpose, an official creditor committee was constituted earlier this year, and this has led to talks between Sri Lanka and the major creditors, excluding China. China has not participated in the restructuring deal. It has only joined the official creditor committee as an observer, saying that it will work out a bilateral deal with Sri Lanka. That is why I told you earlier that China has not helped Sri Lanka. Instead of restructuring the loan and giving some relief to Sri Lanka, China has stayed out of the negotiations. It has only joined the talks as an observer from the outside. Whereas India and Japan, along with France, they co-chaired the official creditor committee along with the Paris Club, and they have finalized the restructuring process. At least as far as their loans are concerned, India and the Paris Club countries. All right, I'll explain what is Paris Club. I'll come to it. Japan and France are already part of Paris Club. Japan is also a member. France is also a member of Paris Club. So India, which is not a member of Paris Club, has worked with the Paris Club of countries and the creditor nations and worked out a restructuring deal, meaning the terms of the loan will be revised. The interest payments will be reduced. Extended window will be given for repayment. The term of the loan basically will be extended for a few more years. So Sri Lanka gets some breathing space. All right, that is what you mean by restructuring of a loan, right? The loan terms are relaxed, interest rate is reduced, the payments are deferred, and extended payment window is given. So this restructuring has been completed. Now, what is this Paris Club? Paris Club is an informal group of creditor countries comprising mainly of developed Western economies. It was formed in 1956 to help Argentina, which was facing a debt crisis similar to Sri Lanka. Argentina had borrowed heavily from various foreign countries and institutions, and it was not able to repay the loan. So the creditor countries, which were Western industrialized countries, they came together to form this club called Paris Club, which has been an informal club for finding solutions for such debt crisis situations. The members of this Paris Club are the members of OECD, which is a European economic grouping, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Those members, which comprises largely of Western industrialized countries, they are the members of Paris Club. It has US, UK, Australia, Netherlands, Japan, France, Germany, many European nations, even Canada, Israel as well. These are the Paris Club of creditor countries. So as you can see, India is not a part of it, but India has worked with Paris Club of countries, with Japan and France, to strike this restructuring deal, because these are the major creditors to Sri Lanka. So now the only creditor which has not participated here is China. China has said it will help Sri Lanka bilaterally. It will strike a separate restructuring deal with Sri Lanka before it is eligible for getting the bailout package from IMF. So India has done everything possible to help Sri Lanka to obtain this bailout package, which can rebuild and restabilize the Sri Lankan economy. So take up a prelims question on this. As part of Sri Lanka's debt restructuring, India has been working with Paris Club members. India has extended around $4 billion worth of assistance to Sri Lanka. India is a member of Paris Club. Which of these statements are correct? Rather, how many of these statements are correct? I'm launching the poll. Let us see how many of you can get this answer right. 3 statements. How many of these statements are correct? As part of the debt restructuring of Sri Lanka, India has been working with Paris Club members. We've extended $4 billion worth of assistance to the Sri Lankan economy, and we are a member of Paris Club. 57% have got the right answer. Good. I'm happy majority of you have got the right answer. Only 2 statements are correct. The first statement is correct. Second statement is correct. Third statement is incorrect. I just told you, India is not a member of Paris Club. We are not one of the creditor countries of the Paris Club, right? We work with Paris Club countries, but we are not a member. So third statement is wrong. The other 2 are correct. We have given $4 billion worth of assistance in the last 1.5 to 2 years to help Sri Lanka overcome its economic crisis. We have been working with Paris Club countries to restructure the debt. So both the statements are correct, but third statement is wrong. So option B becomes the right answer. Now, coming to the last 3 topics, they are all related to one another. They're all related to COP28 Climate Change Summit that is taking place currently in Dubai. At the Climate Change Summit, there have been some big developments in the very first week, and I want you guys to be aware of this. These are very small topics. I'll take you through them. I'll show you the practice questions as well, and then we can end today's discussion. On the very first day of COP28, a new fund was established called the Loss and Damage Fund. The Loss and Damage Fund has been operationalized on day 1 of COP28. So that is the big development. So we should understand, what is this fund? What purpose does it serve? What is its background? How does this fund operate? Which countries are contributing to it? Which countries will benefit from the fund? These are the basic details you need to be aware of. The concept of loss and damage as part of the climate change negotiations was first proposed by a small Pacific island country called Vanuatu. Vanuatu is a small nation, island nation in the South Pacific. It was Vanuatu which proposed the idea of a loss and damage fund in 1991, even before the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change was established. When the world was discussing climate change, when the UN Convention was about to be established in 1992, that's when Vanuatu proposed this concept of a loss and damage fund. All right, I'll explain what it is. I'll come to it. After 3 decades of talks and negotiations, finally, last year, at the Sharm el-Sheikh summit, that is COP27, which was held in Egypt, it was announced by the UN members that loss and damage fund is going to be established. So at last year's COP summit, the announcement was made that the fund will be established, and accordingly, on the very first day of COP28 in Dubai, the loss and damage fund has been operationalized. So under this fund, the concept is that developed nations, the developed rich countries, which have largely emitted greenhouse gas emissions, which are largely responsible for today's global warming and climate change, they will compensate the most vulnerable countries for the losses and damages that they are suffering from. Because see, today climate change has become a reality. The rising temperatures has altered the global weather patterns. It's leading to more extreme weather events and disasters. So around the world, you are seeing more cyclones, more floods, droughts, forest fires, etc. These disasters, which are a result of climate change, it is causing a huge impact on smaller poor countries and small island countries. Because see, there will be a lot of economic destruction whenever there is such a disaster. As extreme weather events are becoming more frequent and more intense, these disasters will have a bigger economic impact. Agriculture will be destroyed, infrastructure will be destroyed, human lives will be lost. So you can quantify the economic losses being suffered by poor countries developing nations, underdeveloped nations. Apart from that, there are other losses which can't be quantified. You can't put an economic number. You can't put a price on the losses happening to the biodiversity, to the environment, to the culture of the local communities, right? You can't really measure what is that damage. So to account for these losses and damages, all the losses and damages, the economic losses, infrastructure loss, agricultural loss, loss of life, and what can't be quantified, like culture, biodiversity, environment. To compensate for all these losses, a fund was proposed. A fund where developed nations will mainly contribute, and the fund will be distributed to the most vulnerable countries, to the least developed countries, small island states, and other developing, underdeveloped nations. They will benefit from the loss and damage fund. This will help in compensating them for the losses, in mitigating the impact, right? That is the primary purpose behind this fund. Now, if you might ask, why should developed countries pay? Why are they responsible? They are responsible for these damages, these losses, because these developed countries became developed and industrialized because they freely burnt fossil fuels for 2 centuries. Since Industrial Revolution, United States, Canada, European countries, Australia, Japan, they've been burning fossil fuel for 150, 200 years. And that is why they are developed today. So they consumed all the carbon budget for themselves, leaving very little behind for developing and underdeveloped countries. So on the principle of equity, based on the principle of historical responsibilities and emissions, they are responsible for the damages occurring today. They are largely responsible for climate change as well, because even today their per capita emissions are very, very high. Countries like US, UK, and EU, these regions account for 50% of all emissions even today. If you add Russia, Canada, Japan, Australia, their total contribution for emissions jumps to 65%. Even today's large emitters like China, India, Brazil, their per capita emissions are very, very low compared to the developed industrialized nations. So they owe a responsibility towards the smaller countries, weaker countries, the vulnerable countries. So that is why they have to pay for loss and damages. Studies have shown that vulnerable countries have suffered losses to the tune of $525 billion in the last few decades. This will increase to more than $550 billion per year. This is not cumulative loss. This is per year loss incurred by vulnerable nations. Every year they are suffering losses to the tune of $550 to $580 billion. So who will compensate for those damages? That is why this fund has been proposed and established. It will operate under the World Bank, all right? But however, it will be maintained by an independent secretariat. Because the developing countries and vulnerable countries, they were not comfortable with the fund being placed under the World Bank, because World Bank is again dominated by Western countries, by US and European countries. So developing nations, underdeveloped countries, they didn't have enough faith in World Bank because World Bank is not very transparent. It's largely controlled in an opaque manner by US and European nations. So only for operational reasons, it's based out of the World Bank. But the condition is that it will be operated by an independent secretariat that will be controlled by a group of countries. So the fund, which has now been operationalized, will invite donations from all countries. Please remember, it's not just the developed countries which are forced to contribute. Any country can contribute. Even India, even Bangladesh, even Maldives, US, Japan, any country in the world can contribute, and the funds will be distributed to the most vulnerable countries. There are around 55 vulnerable nations which will be eligible for receiving these funds. Even other developing nations can apply for these funds. Developing nations can contribute as well. They can donate. They can seek funding as well for compensating for the losses and damages. But there are many questions that remain. The biggest concern is that it is not specifying any targets. It is not mentioning any deadline. There are no deadlines, no targets. There is no clarity on how the fund will be replenished. See, when the fund was operationalized, around $475 million was announced as contribution by UAE, US, European countries, and others. All right, all of them announced few million dollars. Collectively, the initial contribution is around 475 million. That is only a fraction of the amount that is needed, because every year the losses being suffered is above $550 billion. They have contributed only $475 million. You can see the gap. So there is no target for each country, no deadline, and no clarity on how the fund will be replenished. Is that clear? So that is why experts are worried that this is just another commitment or promise by the developed nations. They don't have much hope for it. There is also concern on how the World Bank will operate the fund, because there is a concern about World Bank's transparency. But irrespective of the concerns, the establishment of the fund itself is a big development. That's why you should know what this fund is all about. So please look at the practice question. Loss and damage fund as part of climate change negotiations was first suggested by Vanuatu. It has been operationalized at COP27 Sharm el-Sheikh Summit in 2022. India has contributed $100 million to the fund. How many of these statements are correct? I'm launching the poll. Let's see how many of you can answer this. The poll is live. You have 15 seconds. Eight seconds to go. All of you, please try to attempt the answer. There is a tight contest between A and B. 41% have said option A. 42% have said option B. Let me give you the answer. First statement is obviously correct. I gave you that fact in the discussion itself. It was first proposed by Vanuatu. That's correct. Second statement is wrong. It was announced at Sharm el-Sheikh Summit, but it was operationalized at COP28 Dubai Summit in 2023. That's why second statement is wrong. India has not contributed any amount as of now. We have not announced any contribution. So third statement is also wrong. 100 million was given by UAE, not by India. So 2 and 3 are wrong. So only one statement is correct. Option A is the right answer. Now, a related topic. At COP28, there was another big development. A pledge was adopted, the Global Renewables and Energy Efficiency Pledge. This is a pledge adopted by 118 countries as part of the ongoing climate change summit. According to this pledge, these 118 countries have made a commitment, a promise, that they are going to increase their focus on adoption of renewable energy and improving energy efficiency in technologies. Because the goal is to reduce dependency on fossil fuels, to move away from fossil fuels and adopt cleaner, renewable forms of energy. That is one way of reducing emissions, right? So under this global pledge, these countries have set an aim. It's not legally binding. It's not legally binding on anyone. It's just a promise they are making to themselves. It's just a goal they are setting for the world. They aim to triple global renewable energy capacity to 11,000 gigawatts and double the rate of energy efficiency to more than 4% by the end of the decade. That is the pledge they have adopted. Meaning, the world wants to invest more in renewable technology, in solar power, in wind power, and other clean forms of energy. And energy efficiency has to increase. That is your electronic devices, appliances, gadgets, your automobiles, your industrial processes. They should all be made energy efficient so they consume less energy. So we can reduce our dependency on coal, on petrol, diesel, and other fossil fuels, and shift towards cleaner and renewable forms of energy. So this is the goal set under the pledge. And interestingly, India, China have not signed the pledge. Is that clear? I'll explain why. This idea was first proposed by the European Commission. Earlier this year, the President of European Commission, was the first to propose this idea of a global pledge to increase renewable energy capacity and to double energy efficiency. It was included in the New Delhi G20 declaration as well, which was hosted by India. Even though India was host of G20, we held the presidency, we crafted the declaration. This goal was included in the G20 declaration brought out at New Delhi. But when we adopted the pledge eventually at COP28, India has not signed it along with China. I'll explain why. See, India already has a very big target for renewable energy. We have committed under the nationally determined contributions of Paris Agreement that India will have 500 gigawatt of installed capacity where energy is generated through non-fossil fuel sources by 2030. And as of now, as of 2023, we already have an installed capacity of 170 gigawatts. So we are on the way to approach this target, to achieve this target. Now, if India commits that we are going to triple renewable energy sources, then we might overshoot the target, which could become expensive for India. Meaning we'll have to invest more in renewable energy to meet the new targets, which could be higher than our nationally determined contributions. The other concern India has is that it does not cover hydropower. India has given a big priority for hydropower as a non-fossil fuel energy. India looks at hydropower as clean, as renewable, as a non-fossil fuel form of energy. But around the world, there is no agreement on this. Many countries look at hydropower as environmentally unsustainable. Because hydropower, even though contributes lesser to emissions compared to thermal power, it does lead to deforestation. It threatens sensitive ecologies. It threatens flow of river. It has a lot of environmental issues associated with it. Because for hydro dams, large dams have to be constructed in sensitive locations like Himalayas. So around the world, many countries, they don't look at hydropower as a clean, renewable form of energy. But India has given high priority for hydropower as a non-fossil fuel-based energy. So because of this mismatch, we may not be able to achieve the tripling target. Plus, we already have an announced target under Paris Agreement. If we are to triple it, we are going to overshoot the target, which means we will end up making more investments, which could be an economic loss for India. It could affect our economic growth. So because of these concerns, India and even China, they have not signed the pledge. It's very interesting to note that China already has the world's largest installed capacity of renewable energy, followed by US, Brazil, and then comes India at the fourth position. These are the top 4 countries in the world with regard to their renewable energy capacity. So out of these top 4 countries, China and India, the first and fourth country, have not signed the pledge, but US and Brazil, which have the second and third highest installed capacity, they have signed the global pledge. Is that clear? So please understand what the pledge deals with, what is its aim, when was it proposed, why has it been adopted, why India has not signed the pledge. If you can remember this, it's more than enough for answering a basic prelims question like this. Look at the question. Consider the following. Global Renewables and Energy Efficiency Pledge was adopted at COP28 in Dubai. It includes hydropower as a renewable source of energy. India will sign the pledge after meeting its own renewable energy targets. Which of these statements are correct? I'm launching the poll. Let's see how many of you can get it right. The poll is live. You have 15 seconds. 10 seconds to go. I'm requesting all of you to attempt the answer. Last 3 seconds. All right, 45% have got the right answer. Very good. Option A is the correct answer. Only one statement is correct. That is the first statement. Statement 2 and 3 are incorrect. As I explained, it does not include hydropower as a renewable form of energy. And India has not made any kind of promise. India has not said that we will sign the pledge after we achieve our targets. We haven't said that. So both 2 and 3 are wrong. Only statement 1 is correct. Now we come to the last topic, again related to COP28. It's called the basic grouping. The basic group of countries. This group comes into news whenever the climate change summit takes place. During COP28, basic group of countries have said that developed countries have to take more responsibility. Developed countries have to be held accountable for their historical emissions. These group of countries, they have said that the global stocktake report that was recently published, which is one of the review requirements under Paris Agreement to monitor the progress the world is making towards achieving the Paris goals. In this report, the basic countries have said that it should account for the failure of developed countries in dealing with climate change. Because developed countries have a bigger responsibility as they are the ones who have emitted historical emissions. On the principle of equity, they should do more, contribute more finance, more technology to help developing underdeveloped nations to protect themselves against climate change and to switch towards cleaner technologies. So this demand has been made by basic countries. I will explain which are the basic countries, I'll come to it, but please understand the context. The basic countries have urged that in the global stocktake report that was recently published, there should be more focus on the failure of developed nations in helping the smaller countries and developing nations to deal with climate change. Because developed nations haven't done enough when it comes to providing finance and technology. This has been a long-standing demand of the basic countries. So which are these basic countries? The basic countries include Brazil, South Africa, India, and China. It's an acronym which stands for Brazil, South Africa, India, and China. It was established in the year 2009 during the Copenhagen Summit. When Denmark hosted the climate change summit in 2009 at Copenhagen, that is when this group was formed by these four like-minded countries which had similar approach towards climate change negotiations. Since then, the basic group has been very active at every conference of parties, at every climate change summit. Is that clear? These four countries, they take a common position on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. They have a common position against the developed industrialized nations. And they have been pushing for the adoption of principle of equity in climate change negotiations. Equity means developed countries have to do more. They have to account for their historical responsibilities and contribute more to help out the developing underdeveloped nations. That is the principle of equity. So this group plays a big role at every climate change summit. It brings together the emerging industrialized economies like India, China, Brazil, and South Africa. Today, they might be the large economies and large emitters themselves, but historically, they haven't contributed much. So together, they are pressurizing the developed countries to do more, to provide more finance and technology to assist the other countries in dealing with climate change. That is the purpose of the grouping. So they take a common position. At every climate change summit, they take a common stand. They work unitedly to oppose developed countries. Is that clear? So that is what you should remember about the basic group. So take up a question. What is the core belief of basic group of countries? Climate change is a global threat and all countries need to contribute equally to tackle it. Fight against climate change should be based on principle of equity. Reduce greenhouse gas emissions with widespread adoption of nuclear energy, or UN should provide finance to all countries to adopt cleaner technology. Which is the core belief of the basic group? I'm launching the poll. Let us see how many of you can get it right. If you understood the concept, you can easily mark the right answer. 3 seconds to go. Very good. 70% of you have got the right answer. Option B. That is the core belief of basic group of countries. They want developed nations to follow the principle of equity. Is that clear? They mean that developed nations have to provide more finance, more technology to developing and underdeveloped countries. So that is their core belief. So option B is the correct answer. So this completes my detailed discussion of these 8 important topics from IR. Let me take a look at any doubts, any questions that are left, and then we can close the session for today. Meanwhile, do let me know how the session went in the comments. I'll take a look at all your comments. Shunya is asking, sir, will there be a question on the assassination of Niger? See, that is an internal security topic, and I will discuss it when we come up with internal security sessions. We will discuss that. Don't worry. Veena is asking why basic group is formed. I explained. Basic group was formed by these countries because they have a common position against developed nations. Brazil, China, India, they all face pressure from developed countries. They felt developed countries were not doing enough. So that's why they formed a united group to put pressure on developed countries at climate change negotiations. Sham is asking, is contribution of funds of developed countries mandatory or voluntary? It is voluntary. If you're asking about loss and damage fund, contribution by any country is voluntary. It's not mandatory for any country. It's all voluntary contribution. All right. So guys, these are the questions. Let's end the session for here. I hope you guys liked the session today. Do let me know how it went. We'll catch up very soon. And please focus on your revision. Revise everything that is being covered in class. Be thorough with current affairs and take up the upcoming test series seriously. I really wish all the best for everyone. I hope all of you clear the upcoming prelims. And don't worry, we are there with you till the end to help you in any way possible. So that is it from my side. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.